With the lighting, materials, and exposure in place, I'm ready to do some final tweaks here in the rendering. I've boosted up those indirect bounces to 5, as we can see here in the Indirect Illumination tab, to give me a little more lift in the scene. I've got my multiplier in the Final Gather up at 3 and a little bit of blue going on in there. And I've up-resed my test resolution to 960 by 540, 3/4 of that full size, so I can see things with a little more detail. The tweaks I'd like to make are first on the lamps, making sure that they actually look nice and bright and lit. Then I'd like to tune up some of the materials on the floor, making sure that they're nice and glossy. And finally, I'd like to take the walls and make them maybe just a little less yellow, and try to brighten up the lights overall. I'll start first with the materials. I'll press M for the material editor and let these materials re-render. There's my lit glass up at the top. I'll double click on it and scroll down to the Self-Illumination Glow rollout. Right now this is unitless. We can also switch over to candles per square meter if we'd like to work in physical units. It's currently an arbitrary value, and it's up to us how we do it. If we switch over to our physical units, we're working in 1500. What I'll try first though is working in unitless, a value of 6 as a guess. I'll do a region render, dropping down under area to render and choosing region, and doing a very small region around those lights. It's important to test, and then test again. And when you think you've tested everything, test it one more time. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been caught by something rendering all night and not looking right. So save yourself some grief and make sure you test exhaustively on small regions. That's better. I'll do one more tweak here. 6 is good, but I'd like them to be a little brighter. I'm going to try 15. The reason being is that if 6 is not bright enough, 7 may not do it either. I may need to make a big leap here to get it to work right. This is looking better. They're bright and definitely looking like they're giving off light, but not overly so. Now I'll work on the wall colors and then finally the materials on the floor. Getting a little more gloss in there would help. Again, back in the material editor. Here's that quick tweak. I'll put a value of 20 in those lights. Then I'll double click on a floor. My floor here is in the solid terracotta and I've got the checkers. I'll double click on the solid first, and I'm going to bring up the reflection and gloss just a little bit, maybe 0.75 on the reflectivity and 0.65 on the gloss, a little more polish on that floor. I'll double click on the checkered terracotta and do the same. Again, here's 0.75 on the reflectivity and 0.65 on the gloss. Now it's got a little more shine to it. I also think that the brass in those lamps is a little bit too bright, so I'll double click on it and pull its color down. These are just a bunch of little tweaks that'll really kind of make this stand out. One of the things we can also do in materials, by the way, is bias the reflection color towards the diffuse. I can take this color from my diffuse and clone it across, copying, then clicking on that color and brightening up the value. In this way, the shine matches instead of going to white, and it dims down that material. Here's my wall color. This yellow was neat, but it's a little too yellow, I think. I'll zoom in on it and double click on it, making sure I'm in the right material before I start changing properties. I'm going to take this diffuse color and just pull down the saturation, so instead of a vibrant mustard yellow, it's a little more relaxed. I'll click OK, and there's that material. Much better. When you change materials in 3ds Max, any objects they're assigned to in the scene change as well. Let's test this with a little bit bigger region. It's much better already. I can see that the lamps are nice and bright, and the walls are a little less saturated. A little less on the yellow is probably pretty good, so it shows in contrast to the trim, but still maintains its Art Deco palette. I like the way that's going, and my lamps definitely look like they're on. I'll hit Escape and stop the render if it's not done already, and then pull down and try the floor. It's working terrifically. I can see the lamps reflecting in the floor. The floor is definitely glossier and looks nice and polished and is really shining. There's a few last tweaks to do in the exposure to really make the values pop out. I'll press Escape to get out of the rendering and hit 8 for the exposure and environment dialog. I'll scroll down, and in this photographic exposure, we've got image control. What this lets us do if we want is push the range apart in our image. I'm going to burn the highlights in a little more, overexposing them, boosting that number up to 0.45 so they go a little brighter. Then I'll take the shadows, and as this number raises up, the shadows get a little darker. I'll push that down to 0.5. And now I get a little greater range in the image, brighter brights and darker darks. I'll try one more region render, and I think I've pretty well got it nailed. It's okay to go through and make little tweaks like this to really get things tuned up and really get the render where you want it. It's working wonderfully, as I can see as the image renders. What I've got here are dark shadows. Not very black, but there's some depth in the corner. The bright highlights in the chandelier have a little extra pop to them. The floor is nice and reflective, and it's got a little more contrast in the image, while still maintaining that softness from the lighting and that gentle wax feeling on the floor. My tweaks were worth it. It's always worth fine-tuning it. You want to get the mood across that you want, because what we do here in light and color affects how the audience thinks about what they're seeing and how they feel before anything happens in the scene. Now I'm ready to get my cameras going and really bring this space to life as I move through it.